the idea really is to put a spotlight on the way in which we use norms in prevention with young adults and the fact that we can bring that to life in so many ways. I have never outgrown getting nervous when I present, and I've never outgrown not tweaking my slides up till the last bitter end. So I made adjustments even this morning. I let Tyler know I'll send a PDF of the handouts. So if that helps for your note taking, please know that all of that is coming. A big thanks to Tyler for, again, kindness, patience, and being truly awesome to work with. And I'm just going to thank all of you. I stand by the fact that I think prevention's so hard because if we're doing everything right, it looks like nothing's happening, right? No one calls us and says, hey, good job, nothing bad happened last night. Keep it up. But if something happens, the first question is, did you know about this? What have we been doing? So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for doing what you do to support people in your communities. I live in Washington State, and it's been a very exciting last 48 hours for us. We're not a state that's won a ton of championships, and so the Super Bowl went our way. I know that you should not take pictures of cars while you're driving. This was taken at a red light, but I was behind a car that was said, "Go Seahawks," which is there's no A in there. And I love the commitment to the typo because you got to believe they could have wiped it and not added that extra A at the end. But they were like, close enough. People know what we're talking about. There is so much that can be done with norms. And I think among the things, I'm going to start the way I'm going to end. Know your data, know what stories are in your data. When we do interventions and prevention efforts based on norms, the salience and relevance of the group, the reference group, matters. I work at the University of Washington. If I say most U.S. college students, I'm close, but ideally I'm presenting data that actually shows what most of students at our school does, because that's salient and relevant. But I want to show you just a couple things based on data that we see nationwide. These are data from the Monitoring the Future study out of the University of Michigan. And these are the data that came out last summer. 71.5% of college students report any alcohol use at least once in the past year. To me, there's two very important conclusions to draw about that statistic. One is the flip side. 28.5% of students do not drink. So whether they are students in recovery, students that have abstained their whole life, students that have tried alcohol, but it's been more than 12 months, it's important for them to know they're not alone and to feel supported in the decision to not drink. We also know 71.5% of students aren't over 21. So we do have some underage students that make the choice to drink. Why do I tell you this? I have heard very well-intended presenters stand up in front of groups and say, look, I know you're all going to drink. So if you do this. I know you're all going to drink is a misperceived norm. And for that almost 30% who don't, they just heard someone pretty influential say, everybody drinks here. I know you're going to drink, so if you do this, for those under 21, kind of sounds like permission giving. And without question, a mixed message. So as we go through this, we want to be mindful of not inadvertently contributing to any misperceived norms. We also want to be mindful of avoiding mixed messages. When we look at current behavior, we look at past 30 days, that's almost a 50-50 split. 52% report any alcohol use, 48% don't. When they ask about heavy episodic, or in quotes, binge drinking, 5 drinks in a row at least once in the past 2 weeks, that's 22.8%. What gets portrayed in every movie about college, every social media post, every TV show? If you can see my cursor, the 5 or more. What do most students do? Not that. The flip side. 77.2% either don't drink at all, or if they make the choice to drink, have 1, 2, 3, at the most 4 when they do. Finally, Monitoring the Future talks about high-intensity drinking. 10 or more drinks in a row at least once in the past 2 weeks, that's 4.7%. They asked the question about cannabis a little differently this year, and to make sense of that, they asked it the old way for half the sample and the new way for the other half. The new way included more methods of use that didn't exist even 10 years ago, vaping, edibles, and so on. You're going to see a very consistent theme emerge. Most students don't use. 35 to 40%, depending on how you ask the question, report past year use. What do most people do? Not use. I'm in a state that has exceeded now 13 years of legal cannabis for non-medical, or in quotes, recreational purposes. Our rates are a little higher. We're in the upper 40s, much like the weather right now, but it's still the case that most people aren't using. It's about a quarter with past month use. It's 4 to 6% with use 20 or more days in the past month. As you're going to hear me say, when people misperceive norms, it affects their own behavior. Sandra Wolfson is a researcher who 25 years ago showed that the most pronounced misperceptions of cannabis use come from those that use most often. Those 4 to 6% that use 20 or more days in the past month, if we talk to them, they're going to say all your data are wrong because everyone uses weed. They really, really, really don't. So as you look at your own data, I was just at a meeting where I heard someone say cocaine's everywhere. And I actually said, I guarantee you it is not. Look at your data and be careful when you make statements like, we need to drop everything and just focus on cocaine. You really don't. Go where your data leads you as best as possible. So when we look at understanding perceived norms and opportunities for prevention, I see a bunches in the chat. I'm going to see, oh, it's people saying hi. And one go Hawks. Thanks to that person. So it's rare that you get to include a reference to the 40s on a slide, but look, there's a reference to the 40s. Lewin, as a social psychologist slash sociologist, pointed out that we as human beings are way more influenced by our subjective sense of what's going on than what's actually going on. If you walk into a room and you're like, this is sketchy, I'm out of here, you leave, even if nothing sketchy is going on. Your sense that you don't want to be there leads to leaving. We are influenced by our perception of what other people think, do, and feel rather than what they actually think, do, and feel. And sadly, our perceptions and interpretations are often inaccurate. It was in the 1980s that researchers started to put a spotlight on not only young adults, but specifically college students and the role of perceived norms. And they showed that students way overestimated three things: the acceptability of excessive behaviors. What does that mean? If you survey 1,000 students and say, how do you feel about someone blasting their music on a school night because they're partying in the residence halls, keeping everyone up? I disapprove of that. I don't like that at all. Be respectful. How do you think the typical student at our school feels? Well, it's college. I don't want to be the one buzzkill. They're probably cool with it. When you pool all the data together, 99% of people disapprove of it, but they mistakenly say and do nothing because they think, well, if I ask someone to turn it down, everyone would think I need to get over it. Or if I ask someone to turn it down, no one would support me. The bystander field, as I'll talk about in a bit, has really taken this and run with it. If you have data that show that so often if there's a medical emergency, an overdose, one of the potential barriers to calling for help is, what if people think I should mind my own business? What if people think I'm intervening and I don't need to? I'm making this number up, but if you have data that show that 95% of people in your community would see someone that calls 911 as a hero, more people are going to call for help. So when we talk about those attitudes, those are injunctive norms. Descriptive norms are more due about the rate of use and how many people even engage in a behavior. So the prevalence of substance use among their peers and the perceptions of the rate. What does that mean? If you ask someone, I actually met with a student where I said, what percentage of students do you think drink on our campus? And he thought about it and he goes, all of them, 100%. And then he goes, wait, there's old people, 96%. And I was like, old people. People think that more people drink than actually do. Think about what that means if you're trying to fit in. If I'm an incoming first year student and I genuinely think everyone drinks at this school, I'm probably going to start because I want to fit in. It also looks at misperceptions in the rate. People that drink 3 drinks per occasion are like, yeah, but at least I'm like below everybody else. They all drink 4. People that drink 5 drinks per occasion are like, yeah, but most people drink 6. We even hear the people that drink 8 drinks per occasion go, yeah, but like most people drink 9 or 10. No, this is not unique to college students. This is not unique to young adults, and it's not unique to drinking. It's how we notice what we notice as human beings. I always credit Jeff Linkenbach with this because he's the first person I heard explain this. Imagine you're driving on the freeway for 30 minutes and there's no crazy traffic, there's no backup, like traffic's actually moving. So in Seattle, it's 2 in the morning, apparently. But in 30 minutes on the freeway, what are the cars that we notice? What are the cars that really stand out to us? What would you say? The chat's open. What are the ones we notice? The ones speeding. Speeding one, the red cars, the erratic drivers. Yeah, a bunch of this is coming through. Thank you. Let's look at the ones that are blowing by us or weaving in and out of traffic. How many of those do we see in 30 minutes? Five, six? Let's be bold and say 10. What's the first thing we say when we get out of the car? No one knows how to drive anymore. Everyone drives crazy. What's wrong with people? For whatever reason, we don't notice the hundreds doing exactly what we're doing. With the exception of the person going super slow in the left lane who needs to get over, we don't notice the ones going slower than us because they're all behind us. The exact same thing happens with drinking. If 100 typical college students are at a party, and we base it on past month drinking, 48 of them aren't drinking at all. They're having a soda, a water in their hand, whatever. Another 15 are drinking one drink all night. Another 15 to 20 are drinking two drinks all night. It's probably only five, six people drinking the six, seven, eight, nine or more. But who does everyone talk about on Monday? You don't hear people say, I was at a party this weekend and there was one guy drinking a beer, and it's like, whoa, slow down, buddy. You hear about the extreme. And if that paints the picture that that's what everyone does, you can see where these misperceptions come from. So in the substance use field, we've done a lot with norms, but this has been expanded to so many other behaviors. People tend to way overestimate the risky stuff. Everyone uses weed, everyone drinks, um, you know, everybody speeds now and then. And they tend to underestimate the healthy and protective stuff. If I alternated with water, no one does that. If I ate before I went out, who really does that? Misperceived norms, and I gave the examples for substance use given the original focus from Tyler, can lead to people's substance use even initiating if they feel everyone's doing so. It can lead to people increasing substance use that's already happening. If I drink three, but I think all of you drink five, I'm going to actually increase to four. It can result in people maintaining a high risk pattern. It can result in substance use that associate with more consequences, but the best thing is that it can be corrected. And if a misperceived norm can be corrected, it could extend the abstinence of those currently abstaining if substance use are the issue. How do we keep those that are abstaining continuing to do so? It can lead to a reduction in risky behavior. It can increase protective behaviors. It can even increase bystander behavior. So when I look back over my career and when I look at the evolution of this, people started saying, well, let's do social norms. But they often gave out a statistic and said, we're norming, we're doing norms, but put the spotlight on the wrong thing. Or maybe they addressed behavior where there wasn't a misperception to start with. Or they ran a campaign and didn't really pay attention to things like dosing. Maybe they put up one poster at a very, very big campus or a very big setting. So I'm sure everybody will credit a different person, but I know at least in higher education, a lot of people credit Pat Fabiano at Western Washington University as being the person that really said, we need to think about norms differently if we're going to do social norms. Let's look at what the science says. Let's make sure we dose properly. Let's be sure, are we putting the spotlight on the right message? Pat met with a team, I was a grad student at the time, of people at the University of Washington and said, there's like the big five in norms in her eyes. And she said, you're lucky if you get to meet these folks, you're lucky if you get to learn from them. And she said it was Corinne Johannesson, Wes Perkins, Alan Berkowitz, Michael Haynes, and Jeff Linkenbach. Jeff is in Montana and being in Washington, and we certainly like to look at what's happening in states near us. We started seeing this buzz out of Montana, where putting a spotlight on what most people actually do was working. It was affecting behavior. This is an article, a news release that showed that accurate awareness of peer norms encourages positive behaviors and protects against risky behavior. He said, when you think everyone's doing it, you're more likely to do whatever it is as well. So that allows us to consider these acronyms: Positive Community Norms Framework, PCN, Personalized Normative Feedback, PNF, and Personalized Feedback Interventions, PFI. Before I move to this section, I know, Tyler, you've been keeping an eye on the chat. This might be a chance just to pause and see what questions have arisen, what clarifying questions there might be just before I continue. So I'll ask Tyler as our moderator if he's seen something.
Nope, no questions so far. Somebody has a red fruit, purple fruit analogy that I quite
Yeah, I
like.
see that. Hey, Isaac, nice to see you here. And yeah, these overgeneralizations that get made as well. Good point and good analogy. All right, so this came out in the early 1990s from the Institute of Medicine. And we think about it a lot because any one thing we do is part of an overall puzzle. The Institute of Medicine suggested that for any behavior like alcohol, for example, if you have consequences along the top, we can use strategies in response to this along the bottom. What often gets lost in the shuffle is that the overwhelming majority of people at my school, if you work on a college campus, at your schools, in your communities, they're over here. The majority of people either don't drink at all, or if they make the choice to drink, have no to mild consequences or harms associated with their behavior. This is still a group that is a focus of intervention and prevention. Using old school terminology, primary prevention, more recent terminology, universal prevention. What's the goal? You cast a wide net such that the entire community sees your message with two goals. How do we keep those that are currently abstaining continuing to abstain? And how do we have whatever use is out there, keep it from progressing any further, or ideally even have it take a step back? Things like a community-wide social norms campaign could fall in that category. A quick side note, I took these slides out, but then I stuck them back in because I talked to the person I shared this experience with recently. Clayton Neighbors and I were at a training at a school district north of Seattle, and we put up this slide, and one of the prevention specialists raised his hand and said, "I've been cursed by primary prevention." And honestly, that's a weird thing to be cursed by. Like vampires, I get that. Um, so we said, "Why would you say you're cursed?" And he said, "I'll be right back." He went and brought in this box. If I hadn't seen the box of proof, I'm not positive I would have believed this story. But he was asked to put something in the hands of every kid, first through fifth grade, that was cheap, effective, and one more time, cheap. They had a anti-substance use message on it. I don't even know what I would suggest. And he was like, wait, little kids are learning how to write cursive. They're doing penmanship. They're doing those stories that are like a big sheet of paper that's half drawing and then three lines. So he ordered thousands of pencils that said, "Friends don't let friends do drugs." And they were a hit. The kids loved the pencils. The kids used the pencils. They therefore sharpened the pencils. And they first wound up with pencils that said, "Let friends do drugs," and then finally simply do drugs. He said the first time he saw an 8-year-old with a do drugs pencil, he was like, yeah, we're going to need to get all those pencils back. So they ordered mechanical pencils, but little first graders are like, don't know what I'm doing. And they were just shooting lead everywhere. So he was right. He was cursed by primary prevention. On the far right is where more moderate to severe consequences might be present. And these are the people for whom specialized treatment might be indicated. A lot of my work are for folks that have made the choice to drink, maybe experiencing some consequences. These are the people for whom brief interventions might be indicated. As I conceptualize PCN to PNF to PNFI, PCN, Positive Community Norms Framework, could very much be in this primary or universal prevention domain. When I look at PNF and PFI, it falls more in this brief intervention realm, and I'll try and bring that to life as best as I can. So, part of my job at the University of Washington, I feel lucky to have continued to have part of my time at UW be involved with the Montana Institute and the incredible team there that Dr. Linkenbach oversees. And so it's with their permission I'm even showing some of these slides. The Positive Community Norms Framework is very much a framework. So it's not just, quote, doing norms. Um, it starts with spirit first. If we want health, we must promote health. So it's not scare tactic-y. And it's the idea of let's uncover what the positive is in our community, whatever that might be for whatever behavior we want to address. On the science side, it's let's measure gaps. What do people do? What do they think everyone does? And where there are gaps, especially when people perceive that something is far less present than it is, there's a chance to correct that. In the action stage, we can grow accurate perceptions. In the return stage, that's where you see health promoted. That's where you see this be very transformative. It makes a big impact in the work that's done with communities. So the idea in the positive community norms theory of change is that you uncover the positive. How do we do that? Data collection. I'll end today talking about the very intriguing and engaging topic of data collection, but we need that if we're going to have data we have faith in. Measure gaps between what people do and what they think everyone else does, between what people believe and what they think everyone else believes. Then, using the framework to actually put a spotlight on that healthy norm, you can grow accurate perceptions to eventually increase health. I feel like I quote Jeff a lot, and what Jeff says so often is if we want health, we must promote health. And so it really is putting that spotlight on positive. This is an empirically supported, evidence-based approach. The PCN framework, when we look at impaired driving, successfully reduced misperceived norms, increased the use of designated drivers, and decreased drinking and driving among young adults. That is an amazing and impressive finding. I mentioned Wes Perkins is one of those big five from Pat Fabiano. You can see that Jeff partnered with Dr. Perkins. Clayton Neighbors, who I mentioned earlier, my colleague Melissa Lewis, who I work with on projects out of University of Texas at Arlington, were co-authors on that. I was honored to be a co-author on one that looked at the positive community norms approach in middle and high school students and showed that it impacted lifetime alcohol use, monthly alcohol use, and importantly, the gap between perceived and actual norms in those 6th through 12th graders. To identify what to focus on when using a positive community norms framework, you want to identify the actual behavior. That's where, again, spirit first. What's the behavior we're trying to address? And as you move to science, what questions do we need to ask to really get at what's going on? You can identify perceptions of that behavior. And if there's a gap, and if what most people do or believe is positive, that can be approached and corrected through the PCN framework. The most important thing, assess the gap if there is one, and then for each behavior, get at what do you do? What do you think other fill in the blank students at our school, young adults, parents, community members do? When we assess that with alcohol, we can even ask personally, how often do you drink, if at all? So we're looking at days per week. We then ask, how often do you think the typical person your age drinks? Because since we're collecting all the data, we're going to be able to find out what the actual number is to see where those misperceptions exist. What do you believe? What do you think other, again, fill in whatever the reference is, people believe as well. And we can use the positive community norms framework to develop messages for students. I work on a college campus. Obviously, a lot of these are examples with college students or even high school students that we certainly see as young adults when they're seniors as well. Northwestern University did a campaign that looked at injunctive norms. 99% of their first year students said, if you choose to not drink, good for you. What do we so often hear from incoming students that don't drink? I think everybody drinks, and I think people are going to pressure me to drink. This boosts the confidence and optimism that someone that wants to abstain can continue to abstain when you put the spotlight on this healthy, positive norm. Northwestern also did a campaign that showed that 2/3 of first-year students place little or no importance on alcohol to their social life. When people think, this weekend, I kind of just want to watch movies, go watch movies. Most people are going to want to do the same and not see alcohol be, the part that drives what you do on a Friday or Saturday. This is work that was done at the University of Wisconsin that looked at 90% of high school students disapproving of pressuring another student to drink. Think about what that's going to do. If I don't want to drink, I'm not going to go, cool, I'm probably not going to be pressured. Yet think of what this does to the bystander. Because when someone's like, come on, drink, what's wrong with you? People are more likely to go, you know what, leave the person alone. People are cool with them not drinking. So when you can put a spotlight on this healthy behavior, it changes behavior, and the data support that. One of my single favorite campaigns I've ever seen, this was an award-winning campaign from Millersville University. This is a descriptive norm. It's 98% of Millersville University students who drink use protective strategies when drinking. And then they actually, on people's arms, have some examples. Stay with the same group of friends, use a designated driver, I eat before and during drinking, I keep track of the number of drinks I consume. What have you just done? You've planted seeds for protective behavioral strategies, but you've actually made any one of these strategies legit. You've made them cool to do. Hey, you want to go out? Yes. Let me grab some food though, because I haven't had anything to eat. I don't want it to sneak up on me. People are actually going to feel more confident doing that when they know most of my classmates actually do stuff like this. You could hear 2 hours from any member of the Positive Community Norms team at the Montana Institute. This was certainly just an upper level, high level example. But I hope I brought that to life. I hope you see that it is a framework. It's so much more than doing norms, and it really puts a spotlight on the positive. So often people hear that and they hear about the science of the positive and they ask, what does that mean? It's finding where those good things are and putting a spotlight on that. And it's putting every one of those norms as a majority. And so if we had data, I'm making this up again, that 2% of parents think it's okay to serve their kid alcohol, we would never put a spotlight on that. We'd flip it. 98% of parents, caregivers, and guardians don't want to see a kid drinking underage. It's going to, it's working in that way. So before I continue, let me see what questions people have, what I can clarify before I move to PNF. And Tyler, if you saw something come through, please let me know.
No questions, but there is a good comment from Isaac.
Isaac, you're owning the chat. Isaac wrote, I love these examples because they aren't specific to usage rates, but attitudes toward use. I worry about the perception of those who are using when they see the promotion of non-use stats. These resolve that issue. Yes, yes, yes. The good news is there's yet to be a single study, I feel like I should knock on wood, that shows iatrogenic effects of putting a spotlight on non-use stats. In other words, it doesn't make anything worse. And as you're about to see in about 3 slides from me, for those that do use, the non-use stat might have a pretty surprising impact. In fact, stay tuned for the next 3 slides because I'm going to show you exactly what we look at. So PNF, personalized normative feedback, involves delivering to an individual on their phone, on any device, accurate norms. And from a psychological perspective, why might correcting misperceived norms matter so much? The bulk of the work that I do professionally and the bulk of the interventions that we evaluate use motivational interviewing from Bill Miller and Steve Rolnick in the conceptualization and even in the delivery. Motivational interviewing, they have over 2,000 clinical trials now, as of yesterday, that show that when it's done with fidelity to motivational interviewing spirit, principles, and strategies, it really, really is an approach that works. In the basic principles of motivational interviewing, we talk about expressing empathy, developing discrepancy, rolling with resistance, and supporting self-efficacy. Why do we think providing accurate norms could work? I'm going to draw your attention to number 2 and number 4. Pardon me. Developing discrepancy. What does that mean? It means developing discrepancies between values and goals of importance to the person and ways in which the status quo could be in conflict with that. What's my value? I really want to do well in school. What's the status quo? I haven't gone to class the last 2 mornings because I was hungover. What's my value? I'm trying to watch what I eat, be in shape. What's the status quo? I drink 40 beers a week, which is 6,000 calories a week coming from alcohol. What's my value? I want to be a good friend to the people I'm with. What's the status quo? I say and do terrible things when I've had too much to drink. I am hurting people's feelings. That's not me. Miller and Rolnick say we allow the data to be confrontational, not us. And information only approaches with young adults don't tend to change behavior, but information has its place. It's delivering it in a motivational framework. So what's my value? I want to drink as much as all of you. Like really, I just want to fit in. What's the status quo? I am drinking way more than the average person. I just want to fit in. I just learned that most people actually don't use. If I want to fit in, abstinence is actually the way to do that. The other thing Miller and Rolich show is that we want to support self-efficacy. This is a person's confidence and optimism that they can make a change if that's what they decide to do. Correcting a misperceived norm can totally support self-efficacy. So often we hear people say, sometimes I think about like not drinking on a Friday, but I worry that if I don't, I'll be like the one person not drinking. If we can put a spotlight on the fact that most either don't drink at all, or if they make the choice to drink, have 1, 2, 3, or at the most 4, someone might be more willing to choose to not drink or only have one the entire night. We definitely hear, I think about cannabis use. People say, I think about quitting, but like everyone uses weed. They really, really, really don't. And someone who genuinely wants to quit, we might support the self-efficacy of someone considering that if we can put a spotlight and show this is what most people, in fact, do. So to give you an example of personalized normative feedback, these are data from a study that Christine Lee was first author on. We called it Basics with two C's, Brief Alcohol Screening and Intervention for Community College Students. But the excerpt is something you can do as PNF. It shows here's what you do. You drink 3 days per week. You think everyone drinks 4 days per week. They actually drink 1 day per week. Not for everyone, but for many, when you can correct a misperceived norm, it leads to people making changes in their behavior. I'm going to show you the overall findings on approaches like this in just a bit. PFI can include PNF and can be delivered web-based or online, but the most robust findings and the largest effect sizes are with in-person delivery as BMI. Look, another acronym, Brief Motivational Interventions. So I want to show you, as a PFI, Dr. Mary Larimer's Motivating Campus Change project. This was the first side. It was a one sheet of feedback. This was side one. And in side one, it provides lots of information about the students drinking, but it includes a lot of information about norms. I'm being very trusting as I show you my campus's data. Granted, it's older data, but you'll note that here's the student's peak blood alcohol level, here's their typical blood alcohol level. But what Dr. Larimer did was she included norms. Here's the average peak for other UW students, here's the average typical for other UW students. You're giving people a chance to realize, again, what's my value? I just want to fit in. What's the status quo? My peak is more than 2.5 times that of my peers. My typical is over 4 times that of my peers. Here's the person's weekly pattern. We actually put what percentile they're at. You're at the 88th percentile. That means you drink as much or more than 88% of students your age. We give them the feedback on here's what you said people do, here's what they actually do. In Dr. Larimer's work, we had 1,488 participants randomly assigned to get that, what I just showed you, sent to them through the mail or assessment-only control. And then for 10 weeks, they got little postcards that encouraged them to look back and provided protective behavioral strategies. Participants in the feedback condition drank less at follow-up than people that got a pamphlet about alcohol. And that was a composite score consisting of peak blood alcohol content, past month frequency, past year frequency, and total drinks per week. Feedback participants were more likely to refrain from heavy episodic or binge drinking, 5 or more drinks in a row at least once in the past 2 weeks. Participants that abstained at baseline in the feedback condition were twice as likely to still be abstaining 1 year later when they got the feedback. This actually caused us to realize, wow, we could do this as a universal prevention approach as well. Fun note, you heard Tyler talk about all the acronyms. Anytime you invent something in psychology, it has to spell a cool acronym. It's one of our 3 laws. And we were really, really proud of this acronym, MC squared, Motivating Campus Change. On the one hand, that's cool. On the other hand, every time you type MC squared, that little superscript 2, unless there's a shortcut that I don't know about, is a pain in the butt to have to write, right? I used to work at one of the MC squared sites at the Evergreen State College in Olympia. And every building I've ever been in on a college campus has that directory that's right in like the main lobby. This is my favorite thing I think I've ever seen. This is me standing in front of that sign. And if you look closely, the sign actually says MC2, Bob, this should be squared, motivating campus change. Bob, the sign maker, didn't think very critically about the note he had received. And this literally was up for 4 years. When they remodeled the building, I said, I will donate to the school if I can get that sign. I am the proud owner of that sign. And it is in my office at the University of Washington because I was told you need to get that out of our dining room, which I have now done. I mentioned that there's PFI delivered in person with a brief motivational intervention. The gold standard approach we have in our fields for over 30 years is BASICS, Brief Alcohol Screening and Intervention for College Students, developed by Dr. Alan Marlatt. And what it means to do BASICS is AS is the alcohol screening. You meet with a student, get a sense of what they like about drinking, what they don't like so much, and you collect information from them. That was originally a separate in-person session. Research has shown this can be done online so that the student fills out a survey online and then they come in to meet with you. But it does require screening. The I is the intervention, originally guided a second in-person session, guided by a review of personalized graphic feedback with someone trained in Miller and Rolnick's motivational interviewing. Personalized graphic feedback delivered online or in print, that's a PFI, that's not BASICS. It requires the in-person motivational interviewing facilitator, and it has to be delivered with fidelity to MI spirit, style, and strategies. When basics was evaluated, incoming first year students, the article said to a large Northwest university, it was us, were randomly assigned as students that drank in a high risk way to be in a control group or receive basics. At 1 year, at 2 year, 4 years later, significant reductions in drinking and consequences for those that got this feedback. The feedback doesn't need to be gorgeous. The feedback frames the conversation. I don't know how many of you often see prevention efforts that result in 4 years of significant findings. Do you want to see the gorgeous feedback that resulted in 4 years of significant findings? This is it. This was side one. This was side two. This was made in WordPerfect for, yeah, where are my DOS fans out there? We had to get a graphic designer to make that really big number one, that really big number two, and that shadowy 94. And we were all like, whoa, look at those special effects. And then in 1995, Windows came out and there was clip art, and we had to let her go. But you can see how prominently norms plays in this approach. Why am I showing all of this? At individually focused strategies. Um, I showed you the data that shows that positive community norms framework works and works so well. At least for work with college students, the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism released the College Alcohol Intervention Matrix, where they rate 60 individually and environmentally focused strategies in columns of the relative cost and in rows of the relative effectiveness. In the individual focused strategies, in the top row of what works, there are 8 things. I've highlighted in yellow PNF and PFI, which includes one commercially available product. I highlighted in blue the BMI that uses PFI in its delivery. These are empirically supported, evidence-based approaches. And finally, in-person intervention with no graphic feedback, norms still matter. I love creative titles of publications, and I've told Paul Grossberg how much I've always loved his article, Inside the Physician's Black Bag. I feel like every TV show I watched as a kid, the doctor always had that black bag with that little knee hammer in it. I don't think that knee hammer does anything, but it's a knee hammer. And they tried to find what were the critical ingredients of brief interventions. What they found was actually motivational interviewing, and that the most reliable interaction components reflected underlying core principles of motivational interviewing. And they tried to identify the top 10 clinical tools and topics, and then assigned the related motivational interviewing principles to them. We talked about developing discrepancy and supporting self-efficacy. The top 10 clinical tools, notice the two I just highlighted in norms. These included developing discrepancies, supporting self-efficacy. It included consequences. Well, don't worry about me. Everyone blacks out. They really, really don't. So it's providing what they've experienced and comparing them with college students nationally. And then there's norms right there. People's own behavior compared to that with their peers. You're seeing a very, very consistent theme that norms matters with this age group. I'm going to pivot. Let me pause again to see what questions people have, see what I can clarify, and I'll again defer to Tyler as the moderator because you've undoubtedly seen some of these come through.
So we did have a question from Stephanie, and this was
Sure.
about positive community norms. She wondered if it could come off as shaming for the slim portion of those who do choose the behavior. I think when you were showing the 99%
Yeah.
were fine
Um,
with not drinking.
I'll say 2 things. One, never generate a campaign that you launch without piloting it first. You want to see how if people understand the message. You want to see if people react to any of the images or any of the graphics. You want to try and get a sense of, is there a word choice that would land in quotes better? What I have seen in successful campaigns is there's been such care to that. It should not be hurtful. It should not be shaming. You're putting a spotlight on what most people do. If we said, 98% of people make the smart choice, that's shaming because we're saying the 2% of you that do it, that's a bad call. So saying 98% of people believe this or think this, um, it would be very incongruent with a positive community norms framework and the science of the positive to do something that seems shaming. So I would think I appreciate the attention to that, and I would think do everything in your power to pilot, pilot, pilot. Not only your surveys, which is always good to pilot, but once you generate your materials, um, I worked on a norms campaign that was addressing non-medical use of prescription stimulants. And I was worried, what if the only people in our focus groups are those that don't engage in that behavior? So we made sure we had those that don't engage in the behavior as well as those that do represented because we wanted to get their input as well. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness around that.
One more question from
Sure.
Christina. How do we balance highlighting the norms and harm reduction?
I mean, I think that the one I showed you from Millersville did a great job with that. You know, if you work, I know that the focus of this was young adults. Harm reduction is not anti-abstinence. If someone says, I want to avoid all the harms associated with alcohol, then don't drink. I mean, abstinence is the most harm-free and risk-free outcome. I work with people under 21, and if they say, I already got in trouble once, I can't get in trouble again, if the main harm they're trying to avoid is legal consequences, they may choose to abstain until they're 21. What a approach that focuses on reducing harm acknowledges is that any steps towards reduced risk are steps in the right direction. And so I think, you know, again, I showed you that, what was it, 22% of students drink five or more. We'd want to put a spotlight on what most students do, the flip side. So we wouldn't say one in five students binge drink at our campus. We'd flip it. 78% either don't drink at all, or if they make the choice to drink, have one, two, three, or at the most four. The students that drink five might be more likely to shave off a drink or two when you correct a misperceived norm like that. But especially if you're trying to boost the likelihood that people engage in protective behavioral strategies that will reduce harm, showing that, like, again, what Millersville did, 98% of people used at least one protective behavioral strategy. And then you can provide, including the following. That way, you're not doing an information only campaign, but you're actually leveraging norms to boost the likelihood that people engage in those protective behavioral strategies. I love that we could do this as a quarter long class and we're doing it in an hour with 30 minutes of discussion. So I hope that's answering questions for folks for sure.
Oh,
Um,
Stephanie has one more question before we move
yeah,
on. Any examples of positive messages and associated survey questions for adults or teens
I mean, obviously the focus
or adults
today
of
was supposed to
teens?
be on
Sorry.
young adult. Yeah, you asked me to talk about young adults, but when we do surveys for parents, um, there's data. I mean, again, I didn't come prepared to have that, but there's data that show that when college students think my parent or guardian would be cool with me getting drunk, they're more likely to get drunk. And you can actually predict binge drinking as a function of perceived parental permissiveness. And so there's even been research with dyads where you have the college student and the parent, fill out surveys independently. To what degree do I think they're cool with me doing blank? Then you ask the parent, are you cool with the person doing blank? And so you could even do direct misperception correction right there. But I think, you know, there's data in my own state that shows that when kids think the community wouldn't care if they used cannabis, they're more likely to use cannabis. Among 10th graders, I can't believe I'm remembering these numbers, but they stand out to me. 2016 data, Washington Healthy Youth Survey. Sophomores in high school that said, I think my community wouldn't approve of me using cannabis, 16% report that they've used in the last 30 days. When kids say, my community wouldn't care, 37% have used. So you could pose a question, to what degree do you want to see kids be substance free in our community? Collect the data that way. You want to pair it. To what degree do you think other parents share this same sentiment? And if you have data that show that 99% of students, 99% of parents want to see kids stay substance free, you're going to affect two groups. You're going to affect the kids because when they know the general community wants to see me not use, it's more associated with not using. But you're also going to impact the behavior of other parents, caregivers, and guardians. Because if a parent is like, well, if they're going to drink, I'd rather have them do it in our house. They're less likely to do that when they know 99% of the adult population doesn't want them to do that. So on the fly, I hope that's a helpful suggestion. I see one person say they can't hear me. Is that Tyler, can you hear me
No,
okay?
I can definitely hear you.
Okay.
So I
It might
was,
be volume on their own computer. But
yeah, you might
certainly if
want to
something
leave
goes wrong,
and
let me know.
rejoin.
Cool.
Uh, we have one more question, but if we need to move on, we do have a Q&A session
Yeah, I know we
after.
have the Q&A, but if these are maybe we'll save that one because I'm going to show you what we can do with 2 months notice before spring break. And I also want to just make some suggestions about data collection. That should put us right at the conversation part of this. Um, I think that, as spring approaches, there's multiple ways to address norms through a high risk event. Um, what's the number one spring break destination? I want to see what people put in the chat because we have colleagues that have collected data on this. I see Florida, Miami, Cancun, the beach, Fort Lauderdale. A lot of votes for Cancun, surprisingly. Disneyland, South Padre Island. I did see a couple of votes for just going home with your laundry, and lo and behold, just going home with your laundry is the winner. Christine Lee, Melissa Lewis, and Clayton Neighbors detailed a study of 726 first-year college students that actually were originally included in a study for drinking in a high-risk way. They asked, did you go on a trip for spring break? Most went nowhere. They went home. And so often students are like, wow, I suck. Everyone's going somewhere awesome. They really aren't. Um, Megan Moreno in Wisconsin has shown the more time people spend on social media watching everyone have more fun than them, the more depressed they wind up being. So there's even a misperceived norm about what people do during that week off. What did most people who went on spring break trips experience? Of those that went on a trip for spring break, what percent had a hangover? I don't expect everyone to play, but if you were to play, I'm just curious what people would predict. What percent actually had a hangover? I see guesses ranging from 15 to 60%. A very specific 63%.
Yeah,
Um,
63%. Great.
Yeah, there we
Yes.
go. There's the 63. It's 33. Most did not. So when everyone says, well, on spring break, it's crazy. There's all these crazy parties. Count on being hungover. Most don't get hungover. You can see a theme developing, so I won't ask for your numbers in the chat. Felt sick to your stomach or threw up after drinking? Most didn't. 77% did not. Passed out? 91% did not. Got in a fight, argument, or bad feelings with a friend? 92% did not. What gets portrayed in movies? The crazy stuff. What do most people do? They're not engaging in that. Clayton Neighbors and his team said at the individual level, administrators could sponsor a social norms campaign to raise awareness of the norms around spring break and hypothesized that would probably have an impact on what people do. Megan Patrick and Christine Lee did a study that showed that perceived alcohol use norms moderated the effect of being on a spring break trip, such that trip days they actually went somewhere, were more likely to be what these two researchers called drunk days. The more they perceived, well, that's what everyone's doing. Everyone's getting drunk. When they thought that, they were more likely to do it themselves. We have tools to correct these misperceived norms. Irene Geisner did a study looking at spring break, did a sample of 1,583 college students. Actual drinking during the week of spring break for males, 17 and a half drinks per week. For females, 9 drinks per week. But their perception was that people were doing way more than that. They thought other males, 34 drinks per week, other females, 29 drinks per week. For those that went on a trip, the perceived norms were related to their own actual alcohol consumption. Those that thought everyone's drinking a ton more than me actually drank in a much heavier way. So obviously to address norms, you need good, accurate, representative data. How big does our sample need to be? It's a flaky answer, but it depends. You want a representative sample. A sample represents the population when it exhibits the same characteristics as the population. So there are threats to representativeness. You might send out a survey, whether it's done electronically, social media recruitment, through the mail, you name it. But it could be considered a biased sample if the characteristics of the sample differ systematically from those of the population you're focusing on. If you want to generalize to 18 to 25-year-olds in your region, you want to make sure if you're sampling 18 to 25-year-olds, you actually have a distribution across that age group. It's not just those over 21 or just those under 21. Does it match your population based on gender identity, on race, ethnicity, and so on. Selection bias occurs when you overrepresent or underrepresent a segment of the population. And a response bias is when not all sample respondents complete the survey. There are things you can do to boost completion. I'm going to talk about that. What types of things can impact our ability to compare data over time, even if we have what looks like a really good sample, when you do it? If you want to make your community of young adults look horrible, collect data right after spring break. We don't want that. But Frandale Boca was one of the first researchers to have people keep diaries year long of their drinking. And she clearly showed there was a lot of variability throughout the academic year, such that if we ask data, what have you done in the past 2 weeks, right around week 27, we're going to get a very different sense of behavior than if right around week 31 we ask, what have you done over the past 2 weeks? A really cool study in Canada. Um, this is my retirement portfolio, actually. No, this is average number of drinks averaged across the week. This little line down here is the mean number of drinks each day. They similarly showed massive variability. One of the things they showed is during the fall, one of the biggest weekends was the weekend, pardon me, the weekend preceding Halloween. You can see it was actually the single heaviest weekend. Halloween fell on a Tuesday, and you can notice, if you can see my cursor, the spike right there. St. Patrick's Day actually fell on a Saturday and wound up being the single biggest drinking day of the entire year in the study by Tremblay and colleagues. So if you're collecting data on cannabis use, don't do it right after 420. If you're collecting, or if you do, collect it at that same time frame the following year. But be mindful of any event that you know that could really impact what this looks like. Sometimes people ask how reliable or valid survey data can be, and the answer is, with me shouting, very reliable and valid. You can boost reliability and validity by making sure the testing situation's free of distractions, the measure has clear instructions. Honestly, the more clear the instructions, the better. Use established questions approved by researchers where possible, and allow people to skip questions they aren't comfortable answering. I worked with a colleague at Syracuse University, Dessa Bergensico, where we had people intercept people on college campuses and say, this is easy money. Walk me through how much you drank each day of the last 2 weeks. And then money. We trained the facilitators to act like they screwed up. And they said, oh, I'm so stupid. I forgot to tell you what a drink is. A standard drink is this, 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 and this. Could you please do it one more time? Almost over 55% of students who had at least one drink per week increased their estimate of their drinking immediately after clarifying what counts as one standard drink. If you're going to ask about drinks, you have to define them, because even same session correcting what a drink was led to different estimates. And when people realized what a drink was, their estimates actually went up. One of the most cited articles we have, Baber, Stevens, and Marlatt from 1987. Research for over 3 decades shows that assurances of confidentiality enhances reliability and validity of self-report. The other thing you can do is, if you're really worried about how honest people are being on survey, is build in lie scale items. Washington's Healthy Youth Survey asks about how often you used a painkiller to get high, like Vicodin, OxyContin, Percocet. Then they ask about Brexipentin. If you're like, what's Brexipentin? It's a made-up drug. And if someone says, I use Brexipentin every day, well, we know they're not thinking very critically, or they're just randomly filling out the survey. I was a co-investigator on Christina Jackson and Helene White's study called 3CAM, where we asked about cannabis use, and we asked about smoking weed, dabbing, ripcord, edibles. And if you're like, what's ripcord? We made it up. I would like to draw your attention to the fact not a single person endorsed ripcord as the primary form of cannabis use. People are honest. Jessica Krantz developed an item for Project Chance that asked, have you ever been prescribed or used I always pronounce this wrong, pramipexole, known as Mirapex, to help control your gambling. This is often given for Parkinson's. So it would never and would not be used to be given for gambling. If someone says yes, it probably means they're not reading the questions very closely, or they're not being very honest. If you're concerned about potential response rate, and you want, make the case for, if we're going to collect data, Let's do it right. Why does response rate matter so much? The higher the response rate, the more representative of behaviors of all individuals in the population you're focusing on you're going to get. Decades of research, we always cite Brian Borsari and Kate Carey, show that norms work best when people identify with the group being described and see the data as relevant and meaningful. I can't show students data from before COVID. I can't show students data from another college. I need to show them recent data from our school that we have a lot of faith in. So, look at that special effect. So, having recent data matters. Having data from their own peer group matters. Why else does response rate matter? We do want people thinking critically about statistics. And especially on a college campus, when students are learning about stats, they might ask, well, what's the response rate? Good for them. We want people thinking critically. The bottom line is the higher the response rate, the less doubt there winds up being about the meaningfulness of the findings. From a motivational interviewing framework, if we're sharing norms in a personalized feedback intervention, in a brief motivational intervention, a BMI, if someone says 75% of students say they drink, no way. Numbers got to be higher than that. Everyone lies on the survey. That's what Miller enrollment call resistance. And resistance is okay. We don't confront it. We don't defend the survey. We reduce the resistance, usually through a reflection. These numbers don't hold with what you've seen. No, resistance tends to go down. If you can keep resistance down in one domain, it keeps people open to change elsewhere. Other tips, be mindful of words you use. Hey, everyone, we have to do this survey. No, no, no. We get to do this survey, or we're lucky to have the chance to hear from students about what they think, feel, and do. If people don't understand anonymous, if they don't understand confidential, be sure to explain it in more than one way. Do what you can to really state the care being paid to protecting your participants. Some other examples, make sure that it's not a test. Hey, we have to take this alcohol test. Tests you can pass or fail. It's a survey. We're asking you please take part in the survey so we can learn more about how you've been doing during this time. We're going to ask for your opinions. This means that for these questions, there's no right or wrong answers. We care about how you feel. Let them know they'll be making a difference in programming. Our campus is going to use the information you give us to help prepare for the future. Make sure it's clear they can skip items. This actually makes reliability and validity better. Your participation in the survey is completely voluntary. This means you don't have to participate. It also means you can skip any questions or stop at any time. The survey won't affect your academic standing in any way. Number 5, social media has been a factor in distrust of statements about health. Young and Goldstein said that at the time the platform was called Twitter, there was little elaboration often, and it's acceptable to write short, informal tweets without elaborating on tweet content. So they said, we can do something about that. If you're posting a finding, direct readers to a link with more extensive details about, what actually happened. And that'll address confusion as well as reduce misinterpretation. Once you have your data, explore delivery systems to support prevention efforts and impact young adult health and well-being. And that's what I'm going to end with today. In the college alcohol intervention matrix I showed you earlier, they say one thing we do has to be a piece of an overall puzzle. And what's most important, consider a mix of strategies. The direct quote is, your best chance for creating a safer campus could come from a combination of individual and environmental level interventions that work together to maximize positive effects. Absolutely. That mix includes, but is not limited to, policies, but then importantly, enforcement of those policies. Education, prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery support. And it's not just on you as the prevention community. When it comes to policies and enforcement, there's off-campus law enforcement on a college campus, on-campus law enforcement, the conduct or judicial office, RAs and Res Life that are responsible for documenting when there's a policy violation, upper-level administrators. So often in fraternities and sororities, they have their own judicial board. There's prevention professionals, peer health educators, health promotion staffs, counseling center, parents or guardians, basics providers. I brought up basics earlier. Community providers, campus recovery communities, and campus community coalitions. I used to call all these people our tag team partners. I call them something different now. Fixon and colleagues said, the use of effective interventions on a scale sufficient to benefit society requires careful attention to implementation strategies as well. One without the other is like serum without a syringe. The cure is available, the delivery system is not. You could have the greatest program ever for mandated students, But if you don't have consistent enforcement of policy, they're not going to get there. The cure is available, the delivery system is not. Therapy works, counseling works. Dan Eisenberg, when he was at Michigan, showed the number one reason students dealing with depression don't get help. They don't know where to go. The cure is available, the delivery system is not. I think all these people are delivery systems. So I know I took questions as we went, and that derailed my end time just a little. Final 10 slides. We need to do things with fidelity, and that's the degree to which programs are implemented as intended by the program developers. They say that adherence is essentially the bottom line measurement of implementation fidelity, such that if it's done with adherence to the content, frequency, duration, and coverage prescribed by its designers, fidelity can be said to be high. The content is it's the norm. It's your statistic. But then the dose is the coverage, frequency, and duration. If you put up one billboard, you probably haven't dosed properly. And why that matters so much, Richard Scribner and his team at LSU Health Sciences showed that in a study of 32 college campuses, a social norms campaign overall didn't work. But they started hearing from individual campuses that's not true. It worked on our campus. They did a deeper dive and they found that it worked on campuses with a lower alcohol outlet density. The more wet the environment was, with billboards, restaurants, seeing people drinking, the harder they needed to promote what that norm was. The direct quote was neon signs, storefront advertising, and direct observation of heavy drinking may convey their own normative message to students, thereby heightening student misperceptions of peer drinking norms. So I'll end by saying we have effective strategies out there. If you're implementing an evidence-based approach with fidelity, it'll work. Be patient, pay attention to content, and dose. Measure outcomes, and be sure to consider big picture in context. With an established approach, any change, however big or small, represents people and people's lives. This matters. If you have a program that's homegrown, evaluate it. Add to the science on what works. I said I would end the way I started. All data tell a story. Find out what stories are in your data. If a sample didn't turn out the way you hoped, still see what you can speak to. Most, 90% of those that completed our survey, said this. When people feel like a sample fell short, make it everyone's responsibility to boost involvement and get a more representative sample next time. And even consider like a press release or an email that says, heads up, we're going to launch a survey next week. We'd love to have you do this. We all are afraid of clicking on links in email. Boost the legitimacy of what you're sending by letting people know it's happening. And I'll end by saying science matters, data matter, the work we do matters so very, very, very much. Tyler, you've been incredible. I hope that taking so many questions midway didn't throw off your timeline, but I want to thank you yet again for what you did. My email address is jkilmer@uw.edu. If I referenced an article you can't find, please let me know. I did see one typo that I will obsess about all afternoon. I'll fix that and then send Tyler the slides. But with that, I will thank you all for your interest in this topic. I'll stop sharing my screen and we will move to the discussion and technical assistance part of this. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Yes, thank you so much. We did have one question. That was a great talk. From Leah, if she's still here. How would you shift focus to cultural or data-driven positive norms in a household with generational use?
That's a great question. And that's where this is so personalized that we still, I think I look at projects that we did with cultural adaptations. Our team was lucky to partner with Bonnie Duran on what we called TCU basics. She said, so basics is this evidence-based strategy that works, but it's largely been evaluated in like general four-year college settings. What about our tribal colleges and universities? What if you don't identify with most people? Will norms still matter? So what we did is we looked at what cultural adaptations needed to be made so that what we were describing, the norms we were giving, actually kind of landed and actually kind of made sense. So that's where I will yet again bring up the word piloting. If there's something you're doing with a particular group that you feel like, I want to make sure that this is going to have the intended impact, definitely pilot and course correct if you need to. I brought up Mary Larimer's name before. She published a study about for whom do norms matter most. Again, what if I don't identify with most people? So she did a 2x2x2+1 design, which was very complicated, where you had people describe what they do, and then you asked, What do you think the typical person does? What do you think the typical person of your gender does? What do you think the typical person of your gender and ethnicity does? And then it was like gender plus ethnicity. It was all the different combinations. And what she found was that just letting people know what the typical person does actually had the most significant impact. So I applaud you for your thoughtfulness about that kind of need to potentially adapt. Um, Whenever we talk about norms potentially being a hook for people, they are for many, but maybe not for everyone. And so if you buy the idea that we're listening for a hook with the people we talk to, giving feedback about norms is bait. And if they bite, cool. But if they don't bite, we would never be like, no, eat the bait. We would move on to something else. So for in the scenario you posed, if someone says, I just don't feel like those norms apply to me as much, we would explore what does apply to you as much. And we would just course correct that way.
Awesome. I do not see any other questions in the chat. Does anybody have any questions? You can, of course, ask out loud or type in the chat.
I can ask out loud. Sorry, that was my question about generational use. And this is specific to high school students in Appalachia. And we're in school education surrounding prevention. So in a situation where we have a high school student, is it something where you would see pivoting towards peer normatives if they're dealing with everyone in my family uses. Um, and maybe the person next to them is experiencing the exact same issues. Uh, how would you model that positive normal to make sure that they're getting the right messaging when in that scenario maybe their normal is not positive?
Right. And that's a mix of strategies. Again, first of all, thank you for the work you do. And you saw my slide about a mix of strategies is
I
needed.
did, yeah,
A mix of strategies would still be appropriate here. If we're doing something about norms, it tends to involve feedback about peers, perceptions of peers, both what they do and what the peers believe. So and I apologize if I misunderstood your question, but I don't know that I would certainly not give someone feedback about family history, nor about, generational rates across different households. I think that what we would do is, um, depending on the age group, again, you pick what's the message, what is it that you want to promote?
yeah,
And if what you want to promote is that, I'm making all these numbers up, 85% of students in our school would want to see someone, um, worried about family history get support by seeing someone. More people are likely to seek help. You can
okay,
boost help seeking by putting a spotlight on how much people would support people that seek help, as an example. Um,
yeah,
there's a lot you could do with that, truthfully, but it goes back to that idea of a mix of strategies. When we look at family history and we look at the role of genetics, that's tough, and we tend to address that in our BMIs. We have an entire section in our personalized feedback about family history risk relevant to the person. So that's more likely to come up in a personalized feedback intervention or in a brief motivational intervention, less likely to come up in PNF, for example, or
yeah.
PC.
All right, awesome. Thank you. I just wanted to give you more specifics around the question as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you for the work that you do.
Awesome. Anybody else? Get technical assistance, all your questions answered.
I just wanted to hop in quick question. Appreciate all this presentation. It was really great.
Thank you.
I was wondering, have you seen any data or seen any kind of or maybe there's already been studies done on it. I haven't been able to find any about reluctance with at least the current, like, or the past 10 year students with engaging with online versus paper, like surveys or data
Mhm.
collection. We've seen a lot of that where we can tell them and promise there's no IP tracking. We're not going to do any of that. And they, yeah, but I still don't trust it versus a piece of paper, as a tool they can use individually, on their own that they get to hold on to. We're like an audit. We're working on kind of a version of like an audit C that they can
Oh,
have them
cool.
just do it themselves, score it over here and then have resources on the back. And we've seen more positive students want to do that. It's of course it hampers our data collection, but if there more students are screening, that's at least positive. But I haven't been able to find any kind of like research to kind of back up what we're doing. This is all just student feedback. So
I get anxiety when you describe that because I think of my entry into this field as an undergraduate research assistant in 1989. When I walked in, I go, "What does it mean to do research?" And they go, "Here's a pile of surveys. Go enter them into the computer." Because all we had was paper pencil data collection in 89. I remember when the internet came out, people started publishing studies on the validity and reliability of data collected electronically versus paper pencil. Ever since Lisa Roberts and Liza Miller were the two authors that first showed you get very comparable reliability and validity with paper pencil as you do with web-based. Um, we do know that collecting it that way can be relevant and reliable and valid. And you've shown the ability to adapt when you're getting feedback that people maybe don't trust it as much. You can, with all the assurances, there are still things you can do, like reminding people you can skip something you're not feeling comfortable answering. You can go that route. I've seen places say it's a lot easier for us to collect this electronically. If you prefer a paper pencil version, let us know and we'll hook you up. And so there are places that can give people the option. But I think what you've done is for those that may still benefit but are not willing to do something electronically, you've met them where they're at and you've found a solution that kind of allows you to do that. As you say, it hampers data collection. Um, but I think there is a lot of anxiety about how do I know this is anonymous or how do I know this is confidential or do I want to put these personal identifiers into a survey at this very, very moment? And so we try and monitor that. We try and address that. And if it's for, clinical purposes, certainly you can do all you can to assure confidentiality. When it's research purposes, we've even gotten to the length of obtaining a federal certificate of confidentiality, which guarantees not only that it's confidential, but it even protects the data from subpoena. And we've gone that route with some projects. But long-winded way of saying you're listening to your base and you're listening to the people you're trying to serve. And if they're anxious about doing it through the internet or on a computer or on a device, you've met them where they're at. And I think that's really, really commendable and very cool. Data entry from 1989. Whoo! You had to enter it, and then there was another person that had to enter it to see if you entered it right. And then they tried to cross-check to see if what I thought looked like a 6, someone else thought was an 8. It was a very anxiety provoking. So data cleaning has certainly lessened now that we've moved to the internet. Gather around the fire, everyone. I'll tell you stories from 1989.
Just trying to figure out how old you are, even though you told me how old you were at the start of this.
57. Thank you very much.
All right, who's next? Any other questions? Oh, and we will be sending out the slides after this, I believe.
You're welcome. Thank you for the nice comment in the chat.
All right, well, last call for questions. If anybody has them? Because I've got him on the hook for another 14 minutes, but oh, there's one. Will you be speaking at MSI again this year?
Yes, I will. I'm looking forward to it. MSI is the Montana Summer Institute. I mentioned that part of my work at UW involves being lucky enough to partner with the team at the Montana Institute. So, for folks interested in learning more about that, that's what Abby is referring to.
And when will that be?
Um, I'm going to
June 16th through 19th.
I was gonna say,
I shouldn't have put you on the spot.
not at all.
Okay. Well, sounds like you successfully answered everybody's questions.
I'm obsessing a bit that I took some midway because I had such a perfect end at noon presentation, and I was following your lead on that. I hope I didn't mess anything up for you, Tyler.
It was perfect. It was great. Thank you to everybody who came and asked questions. If you have any questions, please let me know. I put my email in the chat. You will get a survey after this. So, yep. Okay. On that note, thank you, Jason. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. I'll go send you the handouts right now, Tyler.